And if we don't have enough chairs, we can get more chairs from the back as well. It's great to see so many people coming out. I see a lot of new faces tonight, so it's great to meet you. My name is Elliot Prout, and we are the Serenoa chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. So we serve Manatee County, Sarasota County, Hardee County, and DeSoto County. Education is a big part of what we do, so it doesn't only involve native plants, but also things around that as well, like conservation, which we'll learn about a bit tonight, and growth and development, things like that. So before we start the meeting, just some quick bookkeeping stuff. We have a pair of glasses that was left here after the last meeting. So if these look familiar to you, please grab them, or you can grab them after the meeting. We do usually have some plants for auction, but tonight we just have one item for auction, and it's a new book from one of our members, Jon Thaxton. He wrote a book on aquatic butterfly gardening plants. Okay, yes. Which I own. It's an awesome book, so maybe you can get it for a discounted rate tonight. And it's a silent auction. I brought some free milkweed seeds. It looks like most of them are gone. There might be one packet left. And yeah, so and then the other things is it's been a great year for us. This is our last meeting of the season, so we take a few months off in the summertime. But during the last 12 months, we've added 50 new members to our membership, which is pretty impressive. We're around 440 members now, which is the second largest chapter in the state of Florida. We had over 340 people attend our meetings this year. And that's not the last 12 months, that's just from September through May. And we had 190 people attend our field trips this year. We gave away $2,000 in grants for nonprofits to put native plants in their landscapes. We wish we could have gave more, we just need more applicants. And then we also donated 1,000 trees for conservation efforts to the Big Waters Land Trust, native potlatch trees. And next year we plan to give away more trees to the public as well. So that's kind of an exciting thing we're doing. So it's been a really great year. It's been my first year as president. We do have elections tonight. If anybody would like to run for any of these positions, we're welcome to take nominations from the board. But as far as our slate for the next season starting in fall, we have myself, Elliot Prout, as president. We have Steve White on the ballot for vice president. Our secretary, Cheryl Perkins. Chapter representative will be Trent Berry. I don't see him tonight. And then for the treasurer, we have Caroline Root. Is that right? Okay, great. We just met tonight and she decided that she'd be on the ballot for treasurer. So if anybody would like any of those positions, we're open to take nominations. Otherwise, we can go ahead and vote on that slate of electors. Would anybody like to be president? Please. Next year, maybe. Okay, if there's no nominations, all in favor of approving that slate of electors, you can say aye. Is anybody opposed? Okay. So you have it. You have us for another year. It would be nice to get some news blood now. Yeah. What's that? Oh yeah. How long have you been treasurer, Leah? 5 years. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So with that being said, that was kind of housekeeping, but we'll go ahead and get started with the meeting tonight. Well, I guess lastly, before we do, just by a show of hands, does anybody in the room have a preserve that's named after them? Just by a show of hands. Anybody? So, you're supposed to raise your hand. Do you have a preserve named after you, John? Yeah, okay. Our speaker tonight is Jon Thaxton. He's a pretty big name in Sarasota when it comes to planning. I know you've been on the board of commissioners several times through the past, and you'll probably give a great bio about yourself. I personally saw John do a talk on this topic about a year or two ago, and I thought it was a really amazing presentation and really important for our membership to see. So super glad to have you here. I know he's pretty sure a native Floridian, is that right? And you've been working in this area for the last 40 years on these kind of topics. So I don't think there's anybody that's really more qualified to speak to us about this topic. Super excited to have you, John, so I'll go ahead and pass it over to you and let you take it from here.
Thank you. So how's the sound in the back? How is it now? Okay, so just a little bit of background about myself. Because you're never an expert unless you travel 75 miles from where you're from, and this is in my backyard. So yeah, I've been in Sarasota many generations. I'll talk about that in the opening part of this presentation. I grew up in the fishing village of Osprey, long time ago, and went to all the Sarasota County schools. And I was a problem child for those mothers and fathers in the room that have problem children. All hope is not lost. I was arrested 4 times in high school, cuffed, put in the back of a car and taken to the officials, really arrested. And I had this high school biology teacher, his name was Bill Wimbish. And he was a taxidermist and really engaged in also hunting and fishing, which I did a lot. And he turned me on to this discipline of conservation. We called it ecology back then. I started the ecology club in Venice High School in 1973, but that word is kind of passé. So he turned me on to conservation. And my first act of conservation was I-75 stopped at the county line back then. And I looked at the I-75 proposed route and I identified it as disastrous to areas that I knew were great hunting grounds, great for wildlife, and a lot of significant wetlands. So I wrote a letter to the Florida Department of Transportation in 1974. And I had these old quad maps, right? And I drew an alternative alignment to I-75 in 1974 and sent it to FDOT. Long story, really short, they ignored it. I did it again, they ignored it. It was a complete failure. They built the interstate where the wealthy landowners told them to build the interstate. The wetlands and the environmentally significant lands were destroyed or compromised. But I was hooked. I was hooked on land conservation. I was hooked on, quote, ecology. And I was 16 at the time. I'm 68 now. And it's been a passion of mine for my entire career. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to share that that passion, that journey with you over the last 45 plus years. Only I want to do it through the lens of native landscapes, habitats, because I think that's, for me at least, that's the way that I can best express the manifestations of planning decisions and land use decisions that have happened over the time that I have been and engaged in them. I feel particularly stressed tonight because I have a lot of old friends in the room, old meaning people that I've known for a long time, not old as in seniors, gray hairs such as mine. But in particular, I have Maynard Hiss here, and Maynard has been involved in Sarasota County's land use and planning about as long as I have. And Maynard has, I believe, twice won the state award for citizen participation in comprehensive planning. And Maynard is one of those persons, such as Julie and John Miller, who I love to listen to and steal their ideas and make something, lend my spin to it and make it happen. So this presentation was prepared under the hope that it will better inform the people in this room, and a better informed decision-making process can only improve it. There's no way that it can make it worse. So I'm doing this with the anticipation that we will be able to better inform future decisions. I'm going to warn you right up front, 2 disclosures, and they say in public speaking, never do this, but there's a lot of things that I do in public speaking I'm not supposed to do. First off, this talk was never designed to be entertaining. It's not designed to make you laugh. It's not designed to make you happy. It's to inform you of the history that many of you did not experience, but it's important for you to know it moving forward. And it's also may at times, I'm sorry, I had heat exhaustion over the weekend and it's compromised my voice. It may appear pessimistic. It's not intended to be that way. It's just, it's just the facts as I remember them. And most importantly, this is not a presentation meant to criticize. I'm not criticizing the county commission or the city commission that's in office today. I'm not criticizing the planners. I'm not criticizing anyone really, because some of the criticism falls on my back. Some of these decisions I was a part of, they have proven to be very bad decisions. And I will admit to those and tell you where they happen. But that's the talk. This talk was first done for the Eco Summit a couple of years ago. I've changed it a little bit since that time, but the basic story still remains. A presentation of Sarasota County's growth and land use decisions from an environmental perspective. Let me just make sure I can make these, find out what key I'm supposed to hit here. Okay, it might have frozen. There we go. What did you do?
Just, you can hit the arrows.
The down?
Just the right.
Okay, all right, that's what I did do. It didn't like me. So I am a kind of an anomaly in the group. I'm a fifth generation Sarasotan, fourth generation native. I love to start with this picture. This is the Knight family. Those of you familiar with Knight's Trail and Knight's Emporium on Main Street, that's my family. This is AJ Knight and his family. That was my great-grandfather. This little girl to the left of the screen for you, that's Margaret Knight. She'll be Margaret Lewis later in her life. Actually, she was married at 15. And she's my grandmother. She doesn't seem really interested in this photograph here. But her soon-to-be husband, who's obviously not in this picture, William H. Knight, he won the Sarasota Times Father of the Year award twice in the 1930s and 40s. He had 12 children, so I figured that 12 children deserves a Father of the Year award twice. They probably, my grandma probably deserved it 4 or 5 times. But Sarasota, so this photograph is 1913, and you can see my grandmother's, looks like she's about a 2-year-old there, the terrible twos. So Sarasota County looked a lot different then than it does today. This is a photograph of one of the traffic circles in Sarasota around 5 Points. The pedestal there is newer. I have a picture of my grandfather and his brother standing next to this, and that centerpiece is not there, but it was a watering trough. A couple of my great uncles one year went out to, they called it the Mayaca. They went out to the Mayaca and captured some baby alligators and brought them and put them loose in this trough, and then went back to Knight's Emporium right there on Main Street and laughed as the city officials attempted to take these snapping little alligators out of the trough. But a lot of Sarasota looked different back then. It wasn't just the downtown area. About 2/3 of Sarasota County looked similar to this. These are pine flatwoods with palmetto understory. These are actual critical landscapes for not only wildlife, but also for water quality. Combined with the grassy dry prairies, these flatlands, as they are now known as piney flatwoods, my uncles called them, had a long residence time for water. As you know, we get between when we're not experiencing, are we allowed to say climate change in this room, Bruce? All right, just checking. Before the climate and weather patterns started changing, we would get 40 to 60 inches of rain every year. And the rain would settle into these pine flatwoods. And so you had 2/3 of Sarasota County that was under 3 to 6 inches of water every year. And these flatwoods and these prairies provided this amazing utility. They stored water to prevent flooding, and they also retained water so that nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus and other things in sediment could be absorbed within the natural system, so that the receiving waters downstream would be much cleaner and would be arriving at the time of the year that they were supposed to get there. They were habitat to many important keynote species. I put this one in there because bobwhite quail was my favorite game when I was growing up. I grew up on Palmer Ranch. Those of you that are familiar with Rossler's Restaurant, by chance, Rossler's Restaurant is my childhood home. So I grew up with the entirety of Palmer Ranch as a working ranch, unrelated, and the bobwhite quail was prolific. They were just everywhere. It's really hard to describe just how many that they were. Next to some of these pine flatwoods were what we call scrubby flatwoods. These are the habitat that I spent most of my research and time to. For some reason, I was drawn to them at a very, very young age. These are critical habitats because they have this quartz soil that during the Pleistocene Ice Age, when the glaciers were moving into the New England states, all of this pressure was put on the Appalachia, and these quartz sands were transported down into the state of Florida. The state of Florida has no hard rocks, right? We have limestone, sandstone, but we don't have quartz or flint or anything like that. So because of that freak geological event, these soils were transported into our state through rivers, creeks, streams, and the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. And so I don't need to tell you how important soil is to the profile of the plants and animals that live there. This one, similarly, but through a different effect, was very, very important for water quality. These are very highly permeable soil profiles. The water just seeps right through them. They just simply don't flood, except on the periphery when they're next to the pine flatwoods. They're very, very high and dry. And so as the water is being transferred from the surface into superficial aquifers, it's being cleaned and recharging these superficial aquifers with really high quality water. Just as the soil was transported into Florida from a different state, many of the wildlife species that inhabit the scrubs of Sarasota are also transported from different states, in particular Western states. This is a Peromyscus mouse, a Florida scrub mouse. Peromyscus genera is found here, the Isthmus of Panama. There's a similar species in Australia, but not many mice species of this caliber, and they live exclusively in these high dry scrubs, as is the gopher tortoise and the indigo snake. And they're interesting transplants because if you think about it, many of these scrub species are xeric loving animals. They like the chaparral and the desert. So you ask yourself, what the heck are these desert loving plants and animals doing in a subtropical state of Florida? Well, again, during that ice age, the Gulf of Mexico was a fraction of the size. Many of these animals migrated over here. They brought plants with them, such as the bluebonnet, the lupin. And then when the Gulf of Mexico filled back up, they got stuck here. And so now we have these desert-loving animals in this subtropic environment, thriving, provided we leave them alone. They call them isolated wetlands, and that's a little bit of a misnomer because they are isolated wetlands. This Swiss cheese-like landscape is very distinctive to eastern Sarasota and southern Manatee County. And it has these wetlands that are sometimes dry, sometimes wet, and sometimes wet. Many different variants of water levels in these wetlands, depending on drought years, rain years, or what have you. But during the flooding season, during the summer months, these wetlands were interconnected by this thin sheet of water that I just described to you. Also becoming a part of this remarkably valuable utility. And we tend to think of utilities as a sewer treatment plant or a water treatment plant or something like that. But these wetlands and these flatlands and these prairie, they provided the exact same functions as the wetlands that we spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars creating. So as I said, some of these wetlands are wet all the time. They have a center part that really never dries up, but some of them dry up every single year. And that provides a diversity of habitat opportunities for an innumerable number of species. My favorite is the narrowmouth frog, or in this case, a gopher frog. And they tend to only lay their eggs in these ephemeral wetlands that actually do go dry every year or every other year. And what happens in those wetlands, unlike the wetlands that are wet all the time, there's no finfish. And because there's no finfish, there's no predators for their tadpoles. And so their reproduction rate is greatly enhanced because of these specialized, sometimes dry, sometimes wet, quote, wetlands that are in close proximity to these upland habitats where these species live. Moving down the water train a little bit, this is my picture of a grassy dry slough. It's actually not. It's a flooded road in Northport. And I don't tell many groups that because it kind of looks like a grassy dry slough. But for illustrative purposes, let's just pretend that this is what Cowpens Slough or Deer Prairie Slough looked like before we made them look like a ditch. So they are now receiving this slow moving water from the flatwoods and the ephemeral wetlands and the prairies. But they too are very slow moving. This is not a fast moving river except for a couple of weeks out of the year. And that, again, that long residence time, that ability for even this herbaceous wetland to absorb these nutrients is absolutely critical to the function. So all of the habitats that I've talked about so far, the grassy dry sloughs, the herbaceous wetlands, the pine flatwoods, the dry prairie, and the scrub are all maintained by this remarkable phenomenon known as wildfires. The wildfires are started by natural lightning strikes. You are living in one of the lightning strike capitals of the world. There's more lightning, again, prior to this weather freak that we're seeing. There is more lightning strikes in this area of Southwest Florida than almost any place on the planet. And these pine trees at their base have this pine straw. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with pine straw, but it's like burning kerosene-soaked hay, right? You just look at it funny during the drought season and it catches fire, almost like spontaneous combustion. So before we came in with all of our intervening landscapes, such as shopping malls, roads, and the subdivisions, these fires would start and burn for days and days and days and days and days, consuming hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres. Very critical component, not just the flooding, but the fire, critical components to the maintenance of these natural systems. I took this photograph. I think this one actually is maybe from Tall Timbers, Maynard. But I took this photograph because this is what a natural fire in a pine flatwood looks like. This is a fire that with a running start, you can jump over it and you're not even going to singe a hair on your body. They are maintained because they burn so often. The pine flatwoods burn, the prairies burn every 1 to 2, 3 years. The pine flatwoods every 3 to 5 years. The scrubs every 5 to 10 years. And so the fuel is always kept at a minimum. But I like this photograph because I want you to pay attention. I've talked a lot about water quality, and water quality is kind of one of my shticks. I want you to look behind this fire. Forget what's on the green side, right? We can all, brick and fern and wiregrass and whatever the heck that is. But what's on the backside of it? Charcoal. Charcoal. Charcoal is one of the most effective and efficient filters known to man for water quality. 2/3 of Sarasota County burned to the ground before we got here, about every 3 to 5 years. Imagine that, 2/3 of this county every 3 to 5 years, and then another 3 to 5 years, the other third burn. And so this periodic creation of this charcoal, now imagine this rainwater being filtered through the charcoal, being filtered through the natural wetlands, the sloughs, and the flatwoods and prairies. It was just an amazing system designed for water filtration to maintain our estuaries. So moving on to our hardwood hammocks. This is a photograph taken on the upper shore of Upper Mayaca Lake. It's gone. The recent storms have destroyed it all. When I took my bird group out there, as I do every Christmas, we were heartbroken, some to tears, to see this landscape completely destroyed by a hurricane. But I like to tell the group, think of it this way. There's about 6 generations, 7 generations of Sarasotans, and we're the first ones to see this thing at its total climax, at its maximum, and we're the first ones to be able to see it regrow. But these habitats, again, going back to the soil, are critical because they are rich in dark organic soils that are masterful in sequestering carbon and uptaking nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen. They're also important daytime refuge for the hot sun of the Florida prairies and the flatwoods. And they're critical wildlife dispersal corridors, such as the Florida panther. So moving into our wetland systems or our standing water systems, the Blackwater Creeks are so important in Sarasota County. I remember growing up and listening to my uncles and my cousins tell the stories of these Blackwater Creeks. And 2 generations ago, everybody growing up in Sarasota County knew everything about the creek nearest to them. And many of them, most of the creeks in Sarasota, they knew their name, they knew when the snook were running, where the tarpon were at, they knew everything. This is, from my uncles, this was the most storied habitat that we would hear about at our family reunions. Unfortunately, today, it's hard to find many people that know much about these amazing tannin-stained Blackwater creeks. And then, of course, we move into the estuaries, these magical, magical places with some of the highest bio activity of any place on the planet. Again, manufacturing plants for carbon sequestration, nutrient reduction, and sediment control. Not to mention what we found out recently, their really critical role that they play in hurricane protection. These habitats were, during my childhood, unfortunately not so much today, absolutely full of finfish and shellfish. In fact, they were so important that they were a significant economic driver in early Sarasota County. This is a picture of, you can see the harvest here. Most of the fish in that harvest are actually snook, big snook. This is a picture of Casey Key. To the very bottom of the screen, that's the Taylor Fish Camp. That's one of the 3 fish camps that I hung out with as a child. Those of you familiar with Casey Key or the Blackburn Point Bridge, that's the swing bridge location to the right and Dryman Bridge to the left. And that little island there in the middle is where the present day Casey Key Fish House and the Sarasota County Park on the other side of the road is located. But can you imagine a Casey Key that looked like that? If you notice in the upper part of the picture, the Casarino, that was the original Palmer Bay Gulfront estate, directly across from the Spanish Point in the Oaks, where not directly across, but closely across where Bertha Palmer lived up until her death. And then finally, the beaches of Sarasota. Wild and crazy places. These beaches had the ability to accrete and erode hundreds and hundreds of feet every other year, and nobody cared because there was nobody there. The houses were allowed to open and close at will. They were allowed to migrate. This is a picture of one of the most geologically significant places in Sarasota County. This is Point of Rocks. And you can see Crescent Beach there in the upper part of the photograph, but only 1 or 2 houses on all of Siesta Key. I remember my grandmother telling me the story about when the county was going to purchase Crescent Beach, about all the uproar and opposition because people felt, why would we be interested in purchasing this useless piece of sand when we could allow developers to build condominiums now? It is now one of the most valuable pieces of real estate under unified ownership in the entirety of Southwest Florida. So it's a good thing somebody had the foresight to do it. So I'm going to move now. I'm going to leave the ecology part, and I'm going to talk a little bit about growth and development in Sarasota County. When the Knight family first moved here, or the first really good population estimate I can get is 1921. So by that time, the Knight family had already been here 20 years. But at that time, the Sarasota County population, the county, again, it became a county in 1941 when it split from Manatee County. But the county population at that time was 5,000 people. And by 1950, which is where these graphs began, the population had swollen to 28,000 people. So the next series of graphs are going to show the population increase where it happened. And each blue polygon represents so many development units. And when you see the green ones, those are the change from the previous slide that you saw before. But it's important to note here that the development in Sarasota County in the 1950s was primarily located around its municipalities. You have obviously the large area of Sarasota County, or the city of Sarasota. Then you have some population down in Inglewood and some in the town of Venice, and a smidgen in Laurel, Osprey, and Nokomis. But that was pretty much where everyone was located. So by the 1970s, the population now has grown from, in that 20-year period, it went from 28,000 to 120,000 individuals. In this photograph, you can start to see the infamous boondoggle we now know as Northport, down in the kind of the central lower left part of this of the screen, the Mackle Brothers debacle. It's now starting to get off of the ground and show, and you can see the cities beginning their little bit of an eastern expansion with their growth patterns. That's true in both Sarasota and Venice. But also, and equally as important, you can start to see the coastal areas of Sarasota County begin to fill in. Vamo and Osprey, my hometowns, were not even on the map before this, but now they actually have enough development units to make their presence known on this. By 1990, you can see that the population has now grown significantly. There's now 277,000 people in Sarasota County. And this, I call it an assault. I can't think of another term to describe it. I've been criticized widely for using that term, but we are assaulting the eastern hinterlands of Sarasota County, areas that used to be renowned for their agricultural and their open space and their ecological attributes are now being seriously threatened by this new growth. So here we are in 1990 at 277,000. Here is kind of the most recent slide in this. I want to get this one updated because the difference between 2020 and 2024-25 is stark. But you can see, again, the eastern growth in Sarasota County is just uncontrolled. And you can also see the impact of these massive land annexations by the cities of Northport and the city of Venice, because the developers were so disgruntled with Sarasota County's more disciplined approach to growth management. It's hard to believe, but it's a true statement. They went to the cities of Venice and Northport and said, hey, why don't you annex this? And we're going to bring you all this growth and this development and these wonderful tax benefits. So you see the city of Venice serpentining its way to the north and to the east, and you see Northport expanding at almost any direction you can imagine. And all of this was, again, developer driven. And again, to reiterate, beginning from the 1970s till today, all of my characterizations are firsthand observations. I'm not reciting what I read in the newspaper, but I was actually there and a part of this process. Now, one would think that all of this ridiculous, insane growth was done without a plan. Well, one would be wrong, because beginning in 1972, recognizing this threat to Florida's quality of life, natural environment, and economy, because this was happening in other places, not just Sarasota County, the state legislatures approved Saving Paradise. This is the Florida Environmental Land and Water Management Act, and then they followed that up in 1975, my graduation year, with the local Government Comprehensive Planning Act. And this act mandated that all local governments, municipal and county in the state of Florida, adopt a local comprehensive plan, and that all development decisions, permits, regulations, and everything else must be consistent with that plan. Very important milestone in the state of Florida's history, one of the very first states to enact such legislation, very much national news. So here's our first shot at a local comprehensive plan. This is the 1975 version. If you'll notice this tan, this light tan, these are preserved in rural areas, areas that were set aside not to be developed. The development was focused in the three municipal areas of Northport, Venice, Sarasota, a wee bit down in the Inglewood area. But the concept behind this plan was to allow developments in these areas and then preserve the rest for agriculture, open space, and the natural environment. This was an award-winning plan that Sarasota County had. And again, here you can see that light tan area. It actually goes all the way to the bay. All the way to the bay. If you look in Central County there, it's now known as the Elling-Ide property. This rural designated land not only was west of I-75, it was west of US 41. So it was a serious commitment. Here's the 1981 plan. This is drawn by a gentleman named Mark Loveridge. This is the concentric circles plan. And the idea there is that Sarasota County was going to be trend setting. And we were going to intensify the development within our municipalities. And then we're going to provide these transects, these density and intensity transects that lessened as you left the cities until, again, you get into the rural areas. And here you can see very clearly the entirety of eastern Sarasota County. Even, again, you can look in the center part of this photograph, that dark green blob right in the middle there, that's Oscar Shore State Recreation Area. But you can see all of Palmer Ranch and everything east was preservation land, protected lands, either through agricultural preservation. And the cities were isolated so that they would become characters, entities, and social destinations on their own. The 1989 plan, the only thing I'm going to say about this plan is there was a policy in this plan, because now you can see the urban designation, which is the yellow, no longer has any distinction for the cities, right? It's all blah. But here's what the promise was made. They said that if you allow us to convert the entirety of Sarasota County's coastal area for urban development, suburban development, we will preserve the rest of it. And we even had a policy in the plan. And the policy said that I-75 will be the ultimate urban boundary, and there will never be any urban development east of I-75. 1989. It was written in the plan. It was adopted by the county commission. I was there when it happened. I was part of the discussion. So many of us in the conservation community thought, well, okay. Another thing also to note in this photograph is you can see the greatly expanded preserve lands in eastern Sarasota County, with the MacArthur coming on the Walton track, which is now the Central Sarasota County landfill. We still have the hole in the donut, which is now known as the Mayaca Prairies, but at the time it wasn't wasn't acquired, but that was a deal. We'll let you basically destroy the entire coast, and we'll preserve the rest. This is the 1999 plan. Notice the complexity in the plan, the number of categories that are there. And it's very clear that the ultimate containment pattern of I-75 has already been trashed. You can look at the urban enclave up in the northern part of the county. But the thing to remember in this plan is it was the precursor to this plan. This is a 2023 plan. So if you look at this plan and this plan, the green area, focus on the green area, they look somewhat similar. The green area is a little bit smaller, in part because we now have a lot more conservation lands thanks to the environmentally sensitive lands program. But these rural protected areas, once again, are only protected in name only. There's an exception to this preservation status that this plan is calling for in these rural designated areas. And that exception is called the Sarasota 2050 plan. So the 2050 plan, which is the gray area in this particular drawing, was this, they called it the grand bargain, another bargain. It was made between rural preservationists, environmentalists, developers, the county commission, landowners, and 2050 was, and I quote, a master plan that would accommodate population growth while breaking with Florida's history of indiscriminate carving up of the land of the countryside. So 2050 was going to allow development in these eastern rural lands, but only under certain very strict conditions. They were going to create these new urbanist villages, villages and hamlets, and in exchange, everything else was going to be preserved. The Congress for New Urbanism actually awarded Sarasota County an award, a national award for this plan. And some of us were not happy. So at the same time, we convinced the voters to amend Sarasota County's charter. And the charter enforced that any development outside of 2050, like 2050, was going to have to be fiscally neutral, a higher voting standard for the Board of County Commissioners. And so we had these two forces, the 2050 commitments from the County Commission and the charter amendments working in tandem to protect the eastern lands of I-75. And this is simply the charter languages. So that was good when we adopted it. I was the chairman of the County Commission at the time, and I smuggled a bottle of champagne into the county building, and we popped the cork after this was adopted to very little opposition. I can remember the people who opposed it and admonished me for supporting and voting for it. It was Dan Lobeck, Susan Shetley Gum, and Joe Barbetta were the people that had the wherewithal to come to me and say, Thaxton, you're screwing up, you know. These guys, they've screwed us every time. They've never kept their promise. And I said, but look, we got it in writing. We got this thing locked down. You know, we got all of these requirements. And so some of the requirements required this fiscal neutrality. It required affordable housing. It had higher standards for conservation, wider buffer zones, wildlife corridors. All these other things were built into this plan. But unfortunately, this plan leads like Barclay's book of broken promises. These compact urban neighborhoods with internal commercial that were only designed to meet the commercial needs of their community, this walkable neighborhood with various housing types, including a mandate for affordable housing and a mandate for fiscal neutrality, meaning that 100% of the money needed to support these developments were going to come from within the developments. It was not going to come from your taxes. Turned out to be a farce. The facilities, I took this slide from the county's website. And if you notice there, they specifically when they're talking about fiscal neutrality, they talk about transportation facilities, that's called roads, and fire and emergency management, which is pretty self. So when the county commission, couple 5 years ago, adopted the infrastructure surtax, now this is money that we all pay. They dedicated $96.3 million to build transportation facility and fire stations in what are today cow pastures. Lorraine Road, you are funding mostly. The extension and widening of Fruitville Road, you are funding it. You are not creating the need or demand. That's all being created by the 2050 villages, but yet the developers don't have to pay that $96.5 million. They are not allowed by law to include it in their impact fees. So their impact fees go down, the price of the home stays the same. Where do you think that money goes but to the developer's profit? And I'm not opposed to developers' profit, but offering them $96.3 million of our hard-earned money so that they can destroy our open space, destroy our environmental lands, create traffic congestion, and a whole host of other activities is just untenable. As a matter of fact, the $96.3 million, if it were its own category in the infrastructure surtax funding schedule, it would be the largest. It would be more than public safety. It would be more than parks and recreation. It would be more than libraries. It would be more than constitutional officers. We are giving these developers who are required by law to be fiscally neutral almost $100 million out of our pockets to increase their profitability rather than maintaining fiscal neutrality. I describe 2050 as a Trojan horse. It was the worst mistake that I made as an elected official. Should have never done it. Trusting land use and policy decisions with people that have financial interests over those that have community interests is a failed operation. It just doesn't work. I've certainly learned my lesson now, but there's a lot of individuals that criticize me for making, and I just kind of take it and suck it up, because it was a mistake. It was a very bad mistake. I trusted the system. I trusted future elected officials, and they flat out cheated. They lied, and there's no polite way to put it other than that. Fortunately, most of those are no longer serving on the county commission. We have a new group of individuals now who offers new hope. So let's go back and review. 5 points today, looks a little bit different than it did back in the days when Margaret Lewis and her uncles were having cattle and horses and alligators around it. Much of the Pine Flatwoods now look like this. This is Sandhill Preserve. Don't you really love it when they take these names? Sandhill Preserve, I mean, come on, guys. Or, you know, I can go on about this. But anyways, this was the Pine Flatwoods. That was my favorite Pine Flatwoods for hunting quail when I was a child growing up at Rossler's restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, these yards do not hold 3 to 4 inches of water every year. And this is important for people to understand with the recent flooding. Expecting these stormwater ponds to accept all of the water that's falling from the skies and not flooding homes is like expecting a 10-ounce coffee cup to hold 12 ounces of coffee. It just don't fit, folks. It rolls over. And they can do all the modeling they want with a 100-year storm event, but I'm telling you, it's failing. Fortunately, again, we have a board of county commissioners that's looking at this. They're going to have a workshop tomorrow, day after tomorrow, to do it. I'd love to be there, but I'll be somewhere in Orlando. But this is what the Flatwoods look like today, and this is Palmer Ranch, and Palmer Ranch is one of the most ecologically developed communities in our county. So it's this is the high standard. There's nothing here that supports those species that require the periodic fire, flooding, flatwoods, and wiregrass at all. They are gone. Many of these wetland systems, these depressional marshes, these ephemeral wetlands, have been turned into these, quote, stormwater ponds. These stormwater ponds that have standards that are never followed, that become nutrient sources of nutrients rather than the wetlands, which were sources of nutrient uptakes. Many of them are dysfunctional because they're not properly maintained, but this is what a lot of our wetland system looks like. This is an actual slough creek. This is the main A branch of Philippi Creek. This used to be a gorgeous winding creek surrounded by oak hammock and pine flatwoods and probably maybe just a touch or two of prairie. It is totally denuded now. And rather than the water having this high residency time where it sits and soaks and absorbs and processes carbon and nutrients, the water just flushes. I mean, I love the term flush because it's like your toilet, right? It's just one flush and it's all out there. Rather than taking a month to reach rainwater to reach the bay from the upper regions of the Philippi Creek, Philippi Ditch, we should be calling it now. It's there overnight. It's the next couple of days. You can just look at the storm peak and see just how fast we've engineered this land to get destroy these sloughs and these creeks. This was a photograph very near my house. The next 6 or so slides are actual photos that I took of real locations. We have a policy in our comprehensive plan that says these swamps, these hardwood swamps, will be preserved. And those of you looking at the plant species here can clearly see that this is a hardwood swamp with a requirement in the comp plan that it's preserved. This is a photograph 2 weeks later. I'm standing in the exact same spot, and these are these organic soils that I'm talking about. These soils took hundreds of years, many hundreds of years in some cases, to create, where this organic decomposition just enriched this soil. Look at the color of that black soil in the back, and it did have this little. You can see the remnants of the hammock behind there. Where it used to be right up there where I was taking this photograph. This photograph is taken, by the way, on the southeast corner of Blackburn Point Road and US 41. That's standing in the same position today. Mostly impervious surfaces. All of the rich, organic, critical soil was removed from this site because, as you know, organic soil means there's living stuff in it. And you can't build a house on living stuff. You have to have sterile, compactable sand that has none of the properties of the native soils. So this is what's there today. I'm sure it's a fine place for seniors to live and no doubt great services. But what a loss of a resource within 1/2 of a mile of the bay. So very critical. Many of the mangrove swamps in Sarasota County have been reduced to landscape hedges, greatly decreasing their ability to take up nutrients, sequester carbon, and provide critical shelter and habitat for our coastal species. Many of them have been replaced by these hardened seawalls. One of the things that burns me about these seawalls is there was a time, I mean, climate change is nothing new. Anthropogenic climate change is new, but the climate has always been changing. I mean, where we're sitting right here 4,000 years ago is in 10 feet of water. Right? There was no barrier islands. It was just the Gulf of Mexico. But yet, as the sea rises and falls, these coastal habitats move with it. So you always have these zones between it. This prohibits the migration of these critical wetland fringe habitats forever. It's gone. No more mangroves, no more Spartina marsh. Instead of the seawater going up and back, it goes up and down, and all of the wildlife and the ecological function is lost. Many of this has resulted in catastrophic losses of our East Indian manatee, who no longer have these many of the seagrass meadows that they had before. Good news is that a lot of them are rebounding as we speak. And these changes to our landscape are fueling red tide. This organism, this Carina brevis, loves urea-based nitrogen. And all of them, one of our biggest byproducts from human development are these urea nitrogen and these nitrates, which this organism just loves. So red tide is a natural occurring event. It's always been here. It's been here for millions of years. But now, because we are feeding it, the red tide outbreaks are more severe. They're of a greater extent, and they are lasting longer and longer. We now have red tide outbreaks that span years. I did not have this photograph in there originally, but the people of the EcoFest made me put it in there. This is a photograph featured in National Geographic by Joel Sartori, the photographer that's today bringing you the photo arc in National Geographic. And I put this in there not to toot my own horn, but to say that we have destroyed now over 96% of the scrub habitat in Sarasota County. And the habitat that has remained is so separated that the known dispersal habitats and the necessity of maintaining heterozygosity is lost. The Florida scrub jay cannot survive in Sarasota County and will not survive in Sarasota County without human intervention doing things like translocation projects. It's inevitable. This bird is gone from this county unless we intervene. And it's not because necessarily of growth and planning decisions. It's because of bad growth and bad planning decisions. We could have easily preserved this bird. We could have easily preserved the sloughs, the wetlands, many of the flatwoods and prairies that are necessary, but it was these poor decisions that were made. So here's an example of the plight of the Florida scrub jay in Sarasota County. This is, again, real photos. I'm standing in the exact same spot for the next 3 photos. This is the northwest corner of Laurel Road and US 41. The environmental consultant went to this site, and she said that there's no scrub jays there, and that if there were scrub jays there, that it was just incidental and, an accident. And she also characterized the scrub habitat as being overgrown and, shouldn't even be called scrub habitat anymore. Obviously, the Jays had a different opinion. I went to the county commission meeting and argued against this proposal, but lost. Same photograph, same place, just a year later, it's now a CVS pharmacy. Nothing against CVS. God only knows we need more CVS pharmacies around Sarasota County. But the Florida scrub jay was lost. And I could stop there, but the impacts of these growth decisions, I could take these next couple of slides and speak for hours on every one of them. The traffic conditions that you see in Sarasota County today are not necessarily the result of growth and planning. Again, it's a result of bad growth and planning. Imagine that old plan where I showed you the concentric circles. Imagine if we had developed having the same population. We still have the same 485,000 people, but now they're focused in these areas, and we have these large areas of green space and environmentally sensitive lands and agriculture preserved. Transit will work. Transit works in all of those circumstances. But we developed everything with this mindset that all we have to do is widen our roads and build more roads, and we're going to have less traffic congestion. Well, widening roads to cure traffic congestion is like trying to cure obesity by loosening your belt. It only works for a little while, and then ultimately you run out of bell holes, and now you're so fat you can't do anything about it, right? And you're chronically ill. That's what we've done here. And if you think the traffic is bad now, hold on. Because the last 200,000 plus people that came to Sarasota with their cars, we accommodated that traffic by widening roads. We can't do that anymore. The vast majority of our minor and major arterial collectors and connector roads in Sarasota County are built to ultimate capacity. We can no longer widen them to accommodate the traffic. But yet, in these comprehensive plans that I've been wailing about, we have approved already enough development unit, get this, to double our population. We have 400,000 people today, and in our collective comprehensive plans between the cities and the counties, there is enough development units to add another 400,000 people to this community. Where are those cars going to go? Affordable housing, another tragic consequence of bad planning. Rather than creating the correctly located and the correct intensity and densities of land uses, we've allowed them to scatter anywhere and everywhere that the developers chose to put them, with absolutely no mindset paid to affordable housing. I've been going to these land use hearings for oh my, 45 years, and you never hear affordable housing discussed in these things. And there's a reason, because they know that these market rate units are creating this insatiable appetite for affordable housing, and they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to be held responsible for creating it. But remember, the creation of affordable housing units was a written commitment from the developers and the county commission that it will be guaranteed as a result of the 2050 development. Here you can see very clearly that a 4/5 of the county commission, God bless Nancy Dietert for descending. And here we go, Commissioner Mike Moran, interpretation of the law is a community wants to do affordable housing, fine, but they have to do it. That's you, by they, your responsibility. So the requirement for the comprehensive plan and the charter amendment were thwarted and lost. And probably the thing that causes me the greatest heartache. Rossler's Restaurant, if you can imagine it, used to be a chicken farm. We had 60 acres, we had cattle, we had swine, we had turkey, and we had 7,000 chickens. It was called the TA Egg Ranch. I love Sarasota County's agricultural history. It defines Sarasota County, in my opinion, more than does the beaches. This, for me, is our county and our county's heritage. This is our very good friend, Berryman T. Longino, Buster Longino, one of the people that I've always looked up to my entire life. He is no longer with us. His wife Jane is living in Palmer Ranch. Get to see her on occasion. But the likes of Buster are just screaming from wherever it is that they are to see that this rich heritage of Sarasota County is being bastardized and compromised simply because of these pathetic land use decisions. I'm not going to go into the water supply, but let me just tell you, look, if you want to know the problems with water supply and growth, just look at California. You have two priorities. You have the natural environment and you have the human needs. Which do you think is going to win out? Again, when you have profit over social responsibility takes the back seat. So ending on a note of up note, I told you before, this is a little bit of a pessimistic presentation. You believe me now, but one of the highlights of Sarasota County's planning history is the environmental lands referenda history that we have had. And here you can see that even up to 2005, we were able to amass about $500 million for environmental lands acquisition. Of course, this money was then leveraged by state money to enable us to preserve an amazing landscape east of Sarasota County. This is this big green blob here. You can see those Swiss cheese wetlands that I was talking about in Sarasota here. You can see the upper end of Mayaca Lakes. To the far right, you can see the Oscar Scheer State Park. And this is a result of those environmentally sensitive land referendum. You're looking at about 125,000 acres of native landscapes that this community has consciously and deliberately chosen to tax themselves in order to preserve. And it's important to note that you can see this big green blob, and maybe I need to think of a better way to characterize it. But like if you were fortunate enough to be orbiting the Earth in the International Space Station, and it was a good clear day, you could look out the starboard side of the space station and you can see this thing. This thing is now visible from outer space. It's so large and it's so vast, and it is a tribute to the taxpayers of Sarasota County who had the foresight to do this. And it was only possible because of the environmental lands campaign. And of course, there you can see the magnificent Mayaca River running along the western edge. So in closing, a few months ago, oh God, I'm dyslexic. So it was actually about 2 years ago. So that's 24 months. So a few months ago, I had a lot of people saying, we need to change the way we're doing planning in Sarasota. I said, well, that's a good idea. I think I'm with you. Let's do it. But then I started thinking to myself, a really simple question. I call this redneck logic. What's left? What's left in Sarasota County that we haven't planned for, right? Because if you're in business, you're gonna want to know the supply and the demand chain. You're going to know where you're at in the marketplace. You're going to know what your capacity is, what your limitations are. But nobody seemed to have any of these answers. So I went to county staff and I said, hey guys, why don't we chart all of the lands in Sarasota County that are either preserved, developed, or approved for development, and then we'll know what's left, right? We'll know what we have to plan for, and we'll know where it is too, because this spatial identification of it's very important. So this is what that graph depicts. So all of the areas, and it needs to be updated. It's going to look worse. Don't think it's getting any better. So this is all of the developed areas in Sarasota County are depicted in this tan. All the preserved areas are depicted, excuse me, in green, and that is pretty impressive. And then those areas that are approved for development but still have to go through another development stage are in the magenta. Basically, that's the 2050 lands. And so you're looking at the tan development area has about 450,000 residential units. The approved but yet to be developed has another 50,000 residential units. So basically, we've preserved about a third of Sarasota County. And I'm constantly asked, especially by developers, it's like, when is enough, right? Don't you think having preserved a third of it is enough? I would say, hell no. You got 2/3. Why don't we go to the voters and the citizens to ask them, what do they want? Do they want more preserved lands or do they want more developed lands? I think I'm going to win that argument. So get out of my face with that really ridiculous question. But in this tanned and magenta area, we have about 321,000 acres. And I combined them in this slide. I combined the preserved lands, the developed lands, and the lands that are already approved for development. This is what's left. This represents about 34,000 acres. 10% of Sarasota County's land is yet to have significant decisions made as to whether or not it should be developed or preserved. And then I started thinking about that for a minute. And we know from the Minnesota Offshore Archaeological Site and Warm Mineral Springs and Ona and all these other sites, we know that human beings have resided in Sarasota County for 12,000 years. We know that for sure. And so one could easily think that for 12,000 years, for these, hundreds and hundreds, almost thousands of generations, every generation of Sarasotan has had a deliberate and conscious decision to make about whether we're going to preserve it or whether we're going to develop it or destroy it. The people in this room are the last generations of Sarasotan to ever have that decision. The last 10% of the land that is in this slide, those decisions will be made within the next 10, 15 years, for sure. You can bet on it. And when that happens, this entirety of the map is going to be black. So come November of 2026, we are once again, what's that? You know the photo? Yeah. I love it. It's, did Ed take this one?
I don't know, I just recognized.
Yeah, I think this is,
Yeah.
this is an old, I'm pretty sure this is an old Ed Freeman photograph, but I just love it. I love that little pine snag to the left. The American egret. Anyways, 2026, November 2026, we're going to be coming to the voters to once again ask them to renew our commitment to preserving environmentally sensitive lands. We will probably expand it to also the preservation of agricultural land because they play such a significant role in water quality and wildlife habitat. And that's going to be it, folks. You'll be the last generation to get a shot at doing that. From that point forward, it's going to be retrofitting existing development areas to make them better and more suitable for higher standards of water quality and wildlife habitat. But this is a very special time that we're in. It's a special time that has tremendous responsibilities. And while I understand that our history may inform or not our future decisions, it doesn't determine future decisions. We determine it. And that's all I got. So thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to answer any questions. Do we have time for questions? Yeah, okay, Bruce?
First of all, thank you for your lifelong commitment to
Yep.
serving these lands.
Well, let me just stop you there. Because it ain't just, it's not me. It's a lot of the people in this room. And there were generations before us that also had this commitment for doing this. So I'm like myself and Julie and Jono and others, we're like the third generations of Sarasotans that have recognized this and are carrying on this legacy. But anyways, I'm told to be gracious. So thank you for your compliment.
Keep it going. Second, you're safe to use the term Gulf of Mexico here.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good, yes, yes. I don't think, I should have done it during my beach part, right? So this is the historic and archaeologically significant outcropping of rocks in Sarasota we now call Point of Rocks, and it's located on the Gulf of Mexico.
And then lastly, my question is to that last map that you had showing the remaining areas that could be conserved, 0 on the coast.
Yeah, well, and again, this, I can't map small lots or things like this, so this is a macro look at it. And I forgot to finish my story. I told you this ADHD stuff gets worse as you get older, not better. So I went to the county staff and said, wouldn't this be a great idea? And they said, yeah. And I says, well, that's cool. Let's work on it, right? And I got a call 2 weeks later and says, we've been told we can't work on this. I said, wait a minute, you're the county planning department and you don't want to know what's left to plan or where it's at? Yes, Commissioner, actually, that's what he said. I said, all right, so I'm computer illiterate and have no talent for doing any of this stuff. So I contacted my usual cast of characters and friends and finally landed on a friend of mine who's now a hospital board member, Kevin Cooper. And Kevin is very smart. So Kevin Cooper, we sat down over 2 weekends and looked at all this stuff and we prepared these maps. 6 months later, the Sarasota, after I started talking about this and making it public, Sarasota County Planning Department presented a memo to the Board of County Commissioners, and it was entitled, What's Left? Maynard?
You're a realtor,
Was.
and you've been one of the biggest sellers of property to the conservation properties to the community. Oscar Scheer had a huge identity when you sold it, when you sold that idea, you got it to be the first purchase of the program,
Preservation 2000,
right?
now Florida Forever.
I was just wondering if you could describe this as products, the remaining, what you think, like the Oscar Scheer property you sold as, you know, a new state park and a habitat for the scrub jay. I don't even see the premier greenway, which was Cowpen Slough on this, I mean, I can't even see a figment of it, but that was supposed to be the main.
Mhm.
So could you sell some product here? Like some lots to the conservation
Well,
community?
you can see the Mayaca River on this one, and a lot of it has to do with what I chose to characterize and what I chose to leave out, because again, the vast majority of the time that I make this presentation, I'm making it to an audience that's never heard of land conservation like those of us in this room, or really have are totally turned off by land use planning and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I didn't portray some of the sloughs which do have green belted areas along them, but frankly, they're so narrow that even if they were on these charts, they would just almost disappear in the resolution. So I took a hike the other day with John Julie and a bunch of others down to Deep Hole in the wilderness area of Mayaca River State Park. And we always talk about this when we're together. It's all we talk about. But we were thinking about an ad campaign or public marketing campaign for our November 2026 referendum. And it dawned on us that the best route to take for selling, marketing, promoting the environmental lands referendum is that if you look across the broad spectrum of community, of people that live in our community, they all have different reasons for doing this. I remember doing some polling on the Legacy Trail. We were doing a $62 million referendum. I was putting together the PAC and the campaign on that one. And, you know, we hired some pollsters to find out what was the message that would motivate more people to vote to tax themselves for the Legacy Trail. Anybody want to guess what that one motivating word was? By, you know, if you were on one of those word charts, you know, this word would be this size and all the other words would be this size. Anybody got a guess on what that word is? Hardly anybody gets it. I didn't get it. Damn you. Safety. That's what people cared about. They didn't care about transportation. They didn't care about social interaction. They didn't care about kids in strollers or whatever. They cared about safety. So if you go back and look at our referendum language, it always has safety right up front, right? Because we knew that that was what was going to sell. So we're talking about this. Jono and I were chatting about this upcoming referendum. And we realized, and this may sound like kind of a redundant epiphany, if there is such a thing, but these environmental lands mean many things to many people. And they are going to vote for this because of many different reasons. In the past, we've always avoided characterizing the environmental lands referendum as an alternative to development or as an attack on development. We would focus on the heritage, we would focus on the threatened and endangered species, we would focus on the water quality, open space, and parks. That's all changed. You have a county commissioner sitting on the county commission the first time, probably ever, that during his campaign characterized developers as bad as the thugs in gang members. And he said that. I mean, I was on stage with him when he said it, right? That would have not have sold 8, 9, 10 years ago. Look what happened in Manatee County. So I guess the best way for me to return an answer to the question, Maynard, is we are going to do polling. We are going to see what messaging plays the best with the voters, and we're going to target that. But I suspect that we're going to see that some people are going to vote for this to get those damn developers, and other people are going to do it to preserve Sarasota County's agricultural natural heritage. Others are going to vote for it to protect water quality and reduce, you know, there's going to be a lot of reasons. So we're still experimenting exactly the messaging that we're going to use in 2026, but it's top of mind. Yes, sir.
So you draw this map black as if everything is finalized. But Manatee County right now just passed unanimously across their commission to go against some of the bad developments and take away that new urban sprawl zoning and turn it back into rural or parks, or
Mhm.
whatever else they want. Why can't we do that here?
I believe it when I see it.
They just passed.
Well, it hasn't happened, no. They are going to, I mean, we have some of the strongest property rights that have withstood constitutional law and jurisprudence of any state in the nation. And if you are going to remove, now this not only includes zoning, this also includes comprehensive plan designations, which I was very deliberate in describing as approved for development, but not yet finally approved. And I understand the distinction in Euclidean zoning and comprehensive planning, although with Burt Harris, that also backs reasonably, that also vests reasonably back financial expectations, which can easily be interpreted as a comprehensive plan designation. They're not gonna be able to take back those zonings. I'll believe it when I see it. They're taking away hundreds of millions of dollars of vested property rights protected by state law and the Florida Constitution. Their intentions are great. I wish them all the luck. And when I see that happen, my dialogue in the map changes. Sir. Mhm.
My name is Glenn Giblina, and I am from Hamilton County, 45 years. I'm on the Affordable Housing Board. Last year, we did a 50-foot buffer presentation, and I spoke about the Orange County, which was 100 feet at the time.
Mhm.
And after the presentation, we took a vote, so we went from 50 feet to 0. That was the old one.
Right.
So those three developer back commissioners, they're gone.
They are.
We have 3 new ones in. Manatee is far more destructive than Sarasota, I can tell you that right.
Mhm.
We have no affordable housing to speak of. There's now that the developers have, we got some commissioners that have concerns. Now the developers are in Tallahassee, we built 268. Well, we'll just go around the commissioners and we'll go to our boys in Tallahassee and just say, you know what, here's our rights. We depleted it once, and I understand they just snuck it in again, another bill, so the developers are terrible. They are great for land, they don't care about anything, infrastructure, they don't care. They're having a fit to just raise the impact fees to 100%. They should have been paid 20 years ago. You know, it's absolutely crazy. And administrative changes, that's very destructive, right?
Mhm.
So you go, oh, wow, the wetlands, we can just do an administrative change. And I'll give you an example. It took me 10 years to get accessory dwelling that's bad. 750 feet. Carl Group comes in and says, I got 20 acres, 6,000 foot house. I need something bigger. Goes to the administrator. Oh, we'll do an administrator. You can have an unlimited size accessory dwelling unit. And by the way, you want the road change, we'll change that for you. So the developers have bought our commissions in the past. The damage is done. There's already 20,000 permits out there already approved. We put the brakes on 3 developments last week, including Pat Neal's. So we're moving in the right direction, but there is a lot of damage.
I agree. That's why I do the map, is to show that half of the damage is done, but you don't see it yet. It's yet to come, but it's approved. Manatee County is a really, Manatee County during the last election cycle took a 180-degree turn. It was one of the biggest turns that I've ever seen in a local government election. It was going from south to north overnight. Sarasota County took a 90-degree turn, right? So we didn't quite do 180, but for the first time since I was on the board, we have someone on the board who is an outspoken critic of this development. And you know, I can't change what happened in the past. I can only work prospectively and try to make a difference. We all need to work collectively to make a difference in these last development decisions. So part of my motive for doing this talk is this reality that, guys, don't think that your grandkids can fix it, because you're leaving it to them. Yes, sir.
I think this map is so effective because it paints it as a very black and white decision, the quantitative picture. But like, as you point out in your presentation, how much of the development is such a qualitative poor choice, and so much of that black landscape to me has so much additional white space to be redeveloped or to be enhanced. And do you think in the referendum there can be space for also going back to the black and making it gray, or making it more rich?
Yeah, so probably not. And let me explain why. In the referendum several years ago, we made the decision to include what we call parklands. And I'll be honest, I wasn't a big fan of it. You know, I'm a certified tree hugger. I want the most land with the best habitat for the most endangered species that I can get. And parkland doesn't really do that. Parkland is more of a focus on human needs. Once again, I was wrong. These neighborhood parkland acquisitions have proven to be remarkable education tools. If you look at parks like the Jon Thaxton Preserve, or the Urfer Park, or the Jelks Preserve, or these are parks that are very close to the urban developed areas, and they get people, they're accessible for people that would otherwise not access a natural area. They wouldn't take this hike out to Mayaca. They wouldn't go to Sleeping Turtles. They're not going to, they're not going to do that. But if you have a playground there and you've got these other facilities, they're going to come with their kids, and their kids are going to get out in nature and they're going to play with nature. And that is kind of our conduit, our education thing. So I'm a big fan. The parkland will be likely, we haven't made all the decisions yet. We're still contemplating a lot of this in our own little internal circle. The parkland will almost certainly be included in the next referendum, as it has for the last one or two. But there's a sense of urgency to focus on what we got left, because the opportunity for restoration, the opportunity for restoring existing developed areas, that's not going anywhere. That's going to be here 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, down the road. But the opportunity to secure these last ones, that's gone in the next few years. So it's a great idea, and it's one that I speak about a lot. I was one of the principal architects of the Bay development, the 63 acres on the Sarasota Bayfront, where we're, I made this saying up, and now I always forget it though. Create paradise, tear up a parking lot. So there's these opportunities for taking these heavily developed areas and restoring them to water quality utilities. I mean, that project is now, with the work of Steve Swaw and others, we have nutrient trenches and ephemeral wetlands, or coastal wetlands, restorations of polluted bayous. So we have a stormwater from Sarasota downtown area that has gone into Sarasota Bay untreated for 100 years. And this is the first time it's being treated as a result of the investment in these water quality, infrastructure on this most valuable piece of Bayfront land that was a parking lot. And we're going to take the rest of the parking lot and we're going to tear it up too. And we are going to turn it into a blue and green oasis with unfettered public access, free of charge, and ecological restoration showcase. And so these opportunities are out there, but for this particular referendum, the stakes are high, and I want to remain focused on what we've done well and what we can demonstrate absolute success for over the last 25 years.
Maybe one more question, John.
All right, one more.
I just have a question. Someone who's been fighting development for almost as long as you have, but one thing, when I first started out, it was like we were preserving land for eternity, and that's not happening, and I think people need to be made aware of it. Did you hear about Guana River? Guana River Wildlife Management Area, they're trading it, they're trying to trade it and have it developed because it's so valuable for development.
Mhm.
Tomorrow, our committee is gonna decide whether or not the FWC can trade it for little pieces of land here and there that might be in the wildlife corridor.
Where is it at?
Guana River Guana River Wildlife Management Area.
Okay. Pardon? Okay, yeah, I've heard of it, but I wasn't aware of the trade.
Fight it, and you don't even have time for it, but
Well,
these areas in Sarasota County that we are preserving, people need to start realizing we are not preserving them for all times. We're only preserving them for as long as people will fight for them. It's a
And
whole different outlook.
I don't disagree with that. I would just phrase it a little bit differently. I would say that they are preserved in perpetuity. And to date, anytime anyone has attempted to compromise that perpetual preservation status, they've been handed their head on a silver platter. In Sarasota County, and many of the other counties, I mean, just look what happened. I mean, you got the entire state legislature to go against the governor. You had all of these other initiatives where the state was going to bastardize public lands for commercial private sector profit. The better history of these preserved lands in Florida and certainly in Sarasota County is that one of the things that I've noticed in the years is that the public becomes so enamored, so in love, and so stringent in their ownership of these lands that most public officials are really not even attempting it. So I would argue that they are in perpetuity, but I would also support your contention that the only reason they're in perpetuity is because humans care in perpetuity. As long as humans quit caring and we let our guard down, all bets are off, for sure. Thank you all for your attention and for the invitation.